night, hear her croon Russian lullaby. Just a plain little tune. Baby starts to cry. Rock-a-bye, my baby. Somewhere there may be a land that's free for you and me, and a Russian lullaby.
It was 1897 in the small village of Kazhanadok, and Fratka was a young girl of 15 years old. As one of the older children and daughters, she was responsible for the care of her younger brother Nachman, who at this time was about a year old. Fratka was in the house alone with her baby brother Nachman when suddenly there was a loud knock at the door. Shandel, her mother, was in the fields attending their small garden patch. They planted and grew their own vegetables, particularly potatoes, which to the Belarusians was one of the most important staples that they had. The bulbe was called their second bread. The knock came again, this time much louder. "Open up! Open up inside!" the voice exclaimed. Fratka nervously went to the door and opened it. There at the entrance stood a tall man dressed in a long, splendid coat. He wore a beautiful fur cap, and his dark leather boots shone from the polish. He appeared almost military in stature, and he stared down at Fratka. He didn't wait for the young girl to invite him in, but without hesitation, he quickly stepped inside the small house. He turned to Fratka, looked down at this small young girl, and in a very deep, loud voice asked her, "Where is your mother?" Fratka was too nervous to answer, but continued to stare up at this tall, dignified, rather handsome stranger who had very abruptly invaded her privacy. "Where is your mother?" the stranger asked again. This time, Fratka, afraid and stuttering nervously, answered, "She is out in the field attending the garden." The tall stranger looked down at her and commanded, "Go and get her and bring her home." Fratka was petrified and remained motionless. She wanted to get out of this man's reach and to run to her mother for protection. But how could she leave her infant brother Nachman to the mercy of this stranger? "Go and get your mother," he said again. "Tell her to come home. I wish to speak to her." Fratka was out of the door, running as fast as she could toward the field where she knew her mother would be. If she ran fast enough, she thought, she could bring her mother back in time to save Nachman from a horrible fate. What if this man takes Nachman before her mother gets back to the house, Fratka thought. She kept running for some distance, faster and faster. Her heart was beating rapidly and sweat was covering her from head to toe. Then, in the distance, Fratka saw the familiar outline of her mother Shandel tending to the family garden. "Mother, mother, come quick!" shouted Fratka. "He will kill him! Hurry, hurry!" Shandel stood up from the garden patch and wiped wet earth off of her hands onto the apron that was tied to her waist. She took hold of Fratka with both of her hands on her shoulders and squeezed and shook her. "What is it, Fratka? What's wrong?" Fratka began to cry and yell at the same time, making it almost impossible for her mother to understand her. Shandel shook her and shouted, "Tell me what's wrong. Where is Nachman?" Fratka screamed and cried as loud as she could. The man, he's going to kill Nachman." Shandel's face froze and it became pale and lifeless. "The strange man is in the house with Nachman and he'll kill him," Fratka cried. The other villagers, Jews and Gentiles alike, stopped their work and looked up in disbelief as the mother and her daughter ran across the wide, open field, staring straight ahead as if they both had seen a ghost. Shandel reached the door first and flung it open wide as she practically leaped inside, with Fratka several feet behind. They both stopped abruptly. In the center of the house stood the tall stranger, his long, splendid coat hanging down to his ankles, with his back towards them and the collar of his coat concealing his face. Shandel, out of breath and barely able to speak, called to him, "Who are you, and what do you want from us?" As she spoke, she saw that her baby Nachman was sitting up in the crib and seemed to be quiet and rather content. For some reason, Shandel did not seem to fear this strange man who stood tall and erect, almost like a soldier, in front of her. She stepped forward and walked towards him. "What do you want?" she asked again. He didn't answer, but turned further away from her, as if to purposely conceal his face and his identity. Shandel stepped closer and then stopped abruptly. Fratka stood by the crib as if to protect baby Nachman, and watched in amazement as her mother reached out and took the man by his arm as he slowly turned towards her. Shandel stared at his face for what seemed to Fratka like an eternity. The anxiety on Shandel's face slowly began to disappear, and a faint smile began to form around the corners of her mouth. She let out a holler and then a laugh. The stranger came closer and reached out to Shandel with both of his arms. She began to embrace this strange person, who moments ago was a serious threat to the safety of her baby son and possibly to her and her daughter. Shandel laughed and then began to cry. The stranger cried as well. They kissed each other and both cried as tears streamed down his face and Shandel's cheeks. Fratka stared in disbelief and was completely confused at the sight of her mother and this stranger hugging and kissing each other. Well, at least Nachman is safe, Fratka thought. It had been many years since Shandel had seen her brother, and she had almost forgotten what he looked like. She hadn't, however, and was so happy to see him again and to introduce her daughter Fratka to an uncle that she had never met.
Every night, hear a croon, Russian lullaby, just a plain little tune. Baby starts to cry. Rockabye, my baby, somewhere there may be a land that's free for you and me, and a Russian lullaby.